Hello, hello, and welcome, welcome. I'm Catherine Gallagher, and I'm delighted to be bringing this training webinar with Mindset Racing and Reclaim Reframe Toolkit. All I ask is over the next 30 minutes or so that you enjoy yourself, right? And you're engaged within this short presentation. And I would ask that if you're coming to this presentation live, that we're just respectful of what people think and what people say and be present. So switch off your notifications so that you can really fully engage in the presentation itself. I'd like to ask you a question up front, if you may. Tell me, what's one thought that's been looping in your head lately? Can you think about that thought for me? And we'll call that thought back in a little while. So keep that thought in mind. The thought that's racing through your mind, the thought that you're going back and revisiting all the time. Now, this training is for anyone who's tired of those automatic negative thinking processes. It's also for those that are being held back by those automatic negative thinking processes. It's about quieting the noise and reframing our internal self talk, our narrative, our script. Learning how to do that is why we're here. So this is me doing a presentation. I'm a public speaker, a trainer, a presenter. I'm also a senior accredited psychotherapist, and I've been in the industry of training, speaking, and empowerment coaching for nearly 3 decades. So I've been around quite a significant period of time, and I've worked with large organizations, I've worked with clients individually, and I've had many clients coming back to me over these last 3 decades telling me these scripts work. And this is why I'm really keen to share them so that you can invest in them and you can benefit from them too. I'll have an understanding today of why your mind clings to negativity and how to change that script, that mindset. We're also going to look at 3 mindset shifts to silence that inner critical voice. I've also added a few more toolkits just because I'm generous. Okay, and if you do want to get more information, feel free to join my community and visit my website on realisekatherinegallagher.net. There's also a mindset script, mindset reset it's called. You just put that at the end of my website /mindset rescript. Okay, and you can access the toolkit there if you're not joining this live. So in life, life happens. Sometimes life happens without even asking us, doesn't it? And I know there's been times in my life where I've had to pivot in life from a situation. If I think far back in my life, at the very start of my career, I became a nurse. I did 3 years training, qualified, was in general nursing surgical, and then I specialised in sick children's. My identity was built round being a nurse, caring for others. But then life happened. And what happened was I experienced mobility challenges, which is a genetic mobility issue, which I only found out when I started nursing, right? Because it became quite clear that I wasn't able to continue in nursing and I had to pivot from it. And it was a huge challenge for me, as you can imagine. And I'm sure as I'm talking about my experience, you're accessing some of your life pivots and where you've had to change. And I know I've had many since then. And if you join further of my webinars, trainings, and speaking, you have me along speaking, you'll hear some of the other pivots that I've gone through. But the nursing was quite pivotal for me, which is why they're called pivots, aren't they? But that shift from nursing to coaching led me to a greater calling. And there's been many steps along the way from nursing to get me to coaching. But it's allowed me to set up my own business, Step Up CMG Limited. It's allowed me to be able to do a live empowerment section on the business where I'm coaching live empowerment. And it's allowed me to then be able to work extensively within mental health and coaching. And that's brought me a lot of joy, satisfaction. In fact, I'm very passionate about what I do. Sometimes we have those relatable thinking processes, don't we? You know, the one where you question what you've done. The self-doubt creeps in. You rewind and you go over and over that negative thought, that self-doubt thinking in your short-term memory, which reinforces and locks in that self-doubt, and it becomes worse because you're serving that, you're paying attention to that self-doubt. I'll talk about that in a moment. What about that voice that whispers, "Well, you're not ready. You're not good enough. It's too late," or "I'm too old"? How many of us can relate to that internal whisper, that voice that tells us these things which are not true? And perhaps you're tired of positive thinking. Maybe you're tired and you want to ignore it, but maybe it's still there because it usually is. Because ignoring it, avoiding and distracting doesn't take away and address the issue, it just parks it. You still have to come back to it. And what about that voice that tells you that the patterns that you're doing have led you to believe that you're broken? I constantly say to my clients in my clinical practice, no human being's broken, right? We're not broken, but we might be struggling. We might find that we're in a lot of pain, emotional, psychological, or even physical pain. But learning the patterns that have led us to where we are, it takes 66 separate times to create a pattern of thinking. So that's what neuroscientists and research have come up with, 66 separate times. So if you've perfected a way of thinking, a way of doing, whether it's negative and unhelpful and it's not serving you, but that's what you've fed, that's what you've invested in, and that's what you keep doing, then you've perfected it and worked at it really hard. So I guess that's one thing. But wouldn't it be better to start looking at things, pre-framing, setting it up for success, reframing, looking at things in a different, better way for yourself, so you create and rewire your brain and develop better patterns of thinking and doing where things aren't serving you well? And that's what these mindsets, frameworks that I'm about to talk about will help you do. And it isn't about silencing those thoughts. It's about taking back the mic, re-scripting, and changing that inner voice. So your outside voice is your own best champion, as well as your inside voice. Fixed growth empowerment mindset. That's what we're really talking about. Because your mindset is a lens through which you see your worth, your value, your future. And also you can learn to empower yourself so you can change both of these to work for you in a better way. Here are some of the automatic negative thinking processes that we all go through. Catastrophizing, right? Making something into a bigger deal than it really needs to be. Oh my goodness, I can't believe that happened. It's a disaster. Is it? Sometimes it might be, but the majority of times it's not. It's how we are framing it in our mind. Emotional reasoning. If I feel that it's this way, then it must be this way because I'm feeling it. But not necessarily true. Show less. Show less is where we underplay and downplay. We hold back what we are, what we do, what we say. So we're not sharing all of us. And usually that's the case because we fear rejection, disappointment, right? Or we have some other fear, right? What if somebody judges me? That's another fear. Then, of course, there's jumping to conclusion, right? We don't have all the evidence, we don't have all the facts, but we jump to conclusions. And I know some of you are sitting there saying, "That's me, Catherine. I do that," or "I know somebody does that." Filtering is where we negate all the positive, right? We filter out all the positive and we choose only to see the negative things. Then we might discount the positives, right? They're there, we see them, but we're not filtering them, we're just ignoring them. We're discounting them. Oh, it doesn't really matter. Right? That doesn't really matter. That happened because I've still got this and I've still got that. Mind reading. How many of us say things like, or we hear people say, "I know what you're thinking," or "They must be thinking this." Right? Sometimes clients will present themselves to me in my practice And they'll say, you know, this person looked at me and I know what they were thinking. And I'm like, really? Are you sure you know what they're thinking? Have they told you? Well, no, they didn't say to me. Well, then you don't know what they're thinking. You're mind reading. You're making that judgment, right? If in doubt, check it out. Unless it's a complete stranger. And then why are you bothered about what they might be thinking anyway? But someone else's thoughts are their business. They're not ours. My thoughts are no one else's business. Your thoughts are no one else's business unless you choose to share them. Blaming is another automatic negative thought process. Blame ourselves and blaming others. But that keeps us stuck, right? It stops us from moving forward. And sometimes we blame others because we're not ready to move forward or we don't want to let go. We don't want to move forward. Fortune telling, right? How many times have someone said to you, I predict the future? And usually if we're looking at the future in that way, it's an automatic negative thinking process. We're not thinking our future's bright, right? We're imagining all these terrible disappointments and upsets, or nothing really good happens to me, it never has. People say this all the time. Well, yes, they're having good things. It's just you're negating them. Personalization, where we personalize everything. Decisions that are made, behaviors that happen, it's done to get in our way. It's done to hurt us or disappoint us or reject us. And sometimes it's not. And a lot of the time we personalize things and maybe we don't need to put that on ourselves. Change fallacy. If I just change this person, then my life would be great. If this person changed, then this would be better for me. Change fallacy. It's a false perception, right? We can't change other people unless they want to change themselves, right? And sometimes what we then do is we look at magnification. Magnification. We blow something up. We magnify it to the point where it's overwhelming. Overgeneralization, right? We use things, superlatives like it's always, every time. It's a universal. It happens every time. No, it doesn't. Very few things happen consistently all the time, right? To us, about us. And splitting is where it's all or nothing. There's no grey area, all or nothing. Feedback, where we're giving ourselves that feedback, or we receive feedback and we see it as negative. We don't see it as constructive, positive, or helpful. Labeling. Labeling. I'm stupid. That's silly. Why did I do this thing? I'm a terrible, bad person. Sometimes we label ourselves really unkindly, unnecessarily so. The shoulds. It should happen this way. Who says? Who says it should happen that way? Because that's how it's supposed to be. According to who? Right? I remember talking to a specialist and they told me there's thousands of perspectives on something, but we usually only see our own. Or we might see someone else's, but we often find it very difficult to look outside our own frame of reference. And then overthinking, dwelling and overthinking. Overthinking something, dwelling on something, ruminating. These are all negative, automatic thinking thoughts that pop into our head because we're human. You have them and I have them. But your job, my job, anyone else's job is to actually address these. Otherwise, they hold us back. So here's how we can do that. We can look at the framework, and these are 3 framework mindset shifts. Now, it's hard to say. Mindset shifts. Self-doubt to self-trust. Moving from control to flow. Looking at stuck to action. And we'll talk about these in further details. So let's break them down. Mindset, 3 shifts. The first one, self-doubt to trust, to self-trust. Because we often question ourselves daily, don't we? We question our worth, our value, our contributions, our direction, our capabilities. Self-trust begins when you remember that all through those past difficult times you've survived. How do we know that? Because you're here. You have survived. Okay, when you remind yourself of your capabilities, your resilience, your fortitude, your ability to come through difficult, hard, challenging times, you start then trusting and entrusting in yourself because it builds up by not looking for perfection, because perfect is subjective, right? You're not looking for perfection. But by being consistent, kind, caring, compassionate to yourself, and willing to turn up and show up, that's when the self-doubt moves to self-trust. Then look at control and flow. Control is safe often, but it's often not necessarily helpful when it constrains us. It can be like a cage. People that like to always be in control, always have complete certainty, miss out often in a lot of experiences and opportunities because things have to be a certain way. Because that's what they tell themselves. For me to feel safe, for me to have certainty, for me to know what's going on, everything has to be just so. And flow doesn't mean chaos. It doesn't mean throwing everything up in the air and just being completely, free with everything. No. It means knowing what to hold on to and what's serving you and what doesn't serve you well, to let go and release that. When we let go of needing certainty, we might want it, and I'm doing a training, later on wants versus needs, because people often find it hard to define what their wants are, what their needs are. Quickly, wants are indulgent, needs are what serve us and help us to grow and thrive. So knowing, do we need certainty? No. Do we want it? Do we like it? Probably. A lot of people do. But when we demand complete certainty, we then stifle ourselves. When we allow ourselves to have more flow, more ability there to see potential and opportunity, then we create space for getting clarity, reflection time, creativity, being able to do things that we never expected that we could do, and having the courage to take those steps forward. Then looking at stuck in action. Stuck is often a story we tell ourselves that we're afraid because we're afraid to begin. Right? I'm stuck. It's unsurmountable. This is just how it is. Well, it will be if that's what you tell yourself. That's a narrative you create. Our brain doesn't know the difference between what's imagined and what's real. So if you're imagining and telling yourself, this is me, that I'm stuck here, nothing's ever going to change, then that potentially could be the case, because that's what you're setting yourself up to happen. The anecdote isn't a grand leap. If I'm working with clients and I say to them, look, I know that you're finding it difficult to go outside, but I want you to go for a 5-mile hike. That's too big a leap. They're going to look at me and go, I don't think so. That's not happening, Catherine. And they'll shut down and they'll retreat. But when we make that one single intentional step, that's where progress happens. That's where we end up seeing how things build up. Those small shifts, micro shifts we call them. One decision, one conversation, one moment of bravery at a time. Trusting, believing, allowing yourself to see the potentials and the possibility. So here's the self-doubt to trust. I remember standing in front of the mirror, asking myself, who am I? That voice in my head wanting me to stay small, to diminish me, to doubt every step forward that I could be taking. But I started writing down every time I showed up, despite the fear, in spite of the fear. Little by little, as I showed up, my confidence grew. Trust isn't instant. It's earned by proving to yourself you're not giving up on you, by taking those steps forward. Control to flow. Trying to control everything kept me exhausted. It felt like I was walking a tightrope, afraid of any wobble that would lead to failure, rejection, and disappointment. When I let go and allowed myself to trust the process, believing in myself, it felt like flying a kite, still guided, still held, but free to move with the wind. Flow invites magic, where control once demanded perfection. If you look at stuck to action, I used to wait for the right moment, but it never came. So I tried something different because that wasn't working for me. I decided to take one small action, just the one. I made a phone call. I wrote a note. I took a decision. And that moment tipped the domino over. The key to movement isn't clarity, it's courage. And momentum builds when we take intentional action, despite not knowing. If you look at this other tool that's exceptionally helpful as well, it's called the 3 C's Reframe Toolkit. It's something I developed when working with clients. Catch, change, challenge. Catch, challenge, change. It depends on the way you look at it. So you write down the recurring negative thought. Remember that thought that I asked you to look at, that you were looping, thinking about, that negative thinking? Think about that thought right now. If you were to write it down, now our brain processes the thinking word different from the written word. People often tell me they do reflection journals. They write things down. And I'll say to them, that's great, you're getting it out and you're being able to see it differently. You get more clarity of thinking when you write something down, you can see it differently. But do you ask yourself, what can I do about it? What's the evidence with that? How do I know that's true? Is that something that I'm creating in my mind? Or is it actually factual? Writing it down is one of the essential things to do. So you write it down and then you challenge it by asking those questions. How do I know? Who says? Right? Is this helpful? What can I think about it in a different way? Replace it with a constructive version of that. So it might be you reframe it and you look at it in a different and more helpful way for you and say, well, I know I'm thinking about it this way, but perhaps it might be. Or what if it was more like this? And if you can't find a different perspective, ask a trusted person. Because we know if we go to a family member or a friend and we say, listen, you know, I keep thinking this, I keep getting stuck, I'm worried about this keeps going through my mind. That trusted person will go, well, it's interesting you see it that way because it feels more like this. Or have you thought about doing X, Y, and Z? Right? Because they're a trusted person, they want the best for you, and they'll look at things and give you a different viewpoint because they're not personalizing it. It's not personal to them. They can see it more with more clarity. So here's a reminder. You can grab this toolkit on my website, realisekatherinegallagher.net/mindset reset. And it's here you can take a photograph if you like. You know, I'm not precious about these things. If you find this helpful, then use it. Right? It's helpful if you tell people you got it from me. That would be lovely, right? Yeah, use this because it's a very useful tool. So you catch the thought. People say to me, you know, it's really hard to catch that thought because I'm not really aware of it. Yes, we are, right? Because we've perfected that loop of thinking, that way of looking at things. So you catch that thought and you say, what am I telling myself? What am I saying to myself right now? You challenge it by writing it down. And you ask yourself, is it true? Is it fact? Where's the evidence? How do I know? Right? How do I know this? Now, 99% of the time, it's because we're telling ourselves. That's how we tell ourselves we know. But it's not, it's just our perception. If you put 100 people in a room and you ask them to recount a situation that everybody saw, they'll all come up with their own version of it, their own perception, right, of what happened, because that's human nature. Whereas some of our upbringing, our experiences, right, and our frame, how we see things. So empowering that thought and then saying, okay, what's a better, different way for me to think about this so I'm not stuck? How could I look at this in a different, more helpful way? The minute you ask yourself that, you empower yourself. Very useful toolkit. Now, I'm actually going to be talking about pivoting in another training. I'm also going to be talking about blocks, mind blocks. Each of these are very specific. If it's something you'd like to join me on, then there's a QR code here. Please feel free to scan that. Then feel free to join my website and my community group there. Remember, your thoughts don't define you, your actions do. Please take a moment to give me a testimonial. Some feedback is really helpful and totally invaluable. Thank you for showing up and watching this webinar. It's been a joy and a pleasure bringing it to you. I'm Catherine Gallagher, and until next time.